Neil Quilliam with us as a discussant of the panel. Neil is an energy policy, geopolitics, and foreign affairs specialist with extensive knowledge and experience of the Middle East and North Africa region. He is managing director of Azure Strategy Consulting and an associate fellow with the Chatham House Middle East and North Africa program. He headed the program's Future Dynamics in the Gulf project, and prior to that, Neil was project director of the Syria and its neighbors policy initiative and acting head of the MENA program, having first joined Chatham House as a senior research fellow in January 2014. He has also served as a senior Middle East and North Africa energy advisor at the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, senior MENA analyst at Control Risk London, and senior program officer at the United Nations University in Amman. So we will just remind you before I give the floor to Neil that the full program and bios of the speakers is available on the website, and we will repost the address to the website on the chat or Q&A. And we also invite the audience to put forward questions in the Q&A tab just down to the right on the screen through the session. Neil, the floor is yours.
Thank you for the very kind introduction, and also for inviting me to be a discussant for this very important panel. I'm really pleased to be a discussant because I think this is obviously a very important subject, and one that I've sort of followed off and on quite closely over the past decade. But having stepped out for a few years, I'm excited to come back and learn more from our three speakers. We have three speakers this afternoon joining us: Emmanuel Biririza, who is an urban energy specialist with UN Habitat. We have Øwre, who works with UNHQ partnerships, rapid response teams, and knowledge development within urban emergency responses, resilience, clean energy, sustainability in sites, and settlements in the Norwegian Refugee Council. And we're also joined by Pierre Khoury, who is General Director and President of the Board of the Lebanese Center for Energy Conservation. Now, colleagues, I'm going to give you each 10 minutes to sort of kick things off, start off the conversation, and then following your consecutive 10 minutes, we'll open up for discussion and conversation. If we can run in this order, Emmanuel, if you start, then Yom, and then Pierre, if you can sort of bring up the rear guard and continue, that will be wonderful. So Emmanuel, if we could start with you. Thank you very much for joining us.
Hi, thank you very much. Can you see my screen?
I can see you, but I can't see your screen, unfortunately.
Okay. Now you can see, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's super.
Okay. All right. So thanks very much for this opportunity. As for the introduction, I also I'm speaking from Nairobi at UN Habitat with urban-based energy services, and I'm very much glad to be here to share a little bit of my experience in this regard. As you rightly said, Neil, of course, I'm also very much excited because I've been working in this area of energy for the past 17 years, and I've got stuck into it. Briefly on UN Habitat. So UN Habitat mandate, as you all know, it's to promote socially and environmentally equitable cities. Of course, providing shelter and adequate all services. And then within the UN Habitat, we have energy solution team. And what we are very much promoting is the use of efficient measures and renewable energy technologies to sustain the human settlements and of course to bring resilience. with a vision of course, doing a lot we can do for mitigation aspects. And well, you already said it. I mean, the energy consumption is very much pertinent into the cities in urban areas, accounting 3/4 of the primary energy consumption in the world. And of course, what we want to advocate is to bring equitable, more inclusive energy solutions, of course, while minimizing ecological footprint of the cities. And in this case, of course, we do promote affordable, clean, reliable, and energy solutions in the peri-urban and low-income communities, especially. So what we do in terms of energy, we promote, of course, technology and innovation, where we want to integrate renewable energy solutions in the urban infrastructures and services. Something like, things like e-mobility, green housing, while fostering innovative solutions, lowering, consumptions, embedding renewable energies into the equation. But also we work very much in collaboration with the academic institution and the other partners to undertake research and development in low carbon development paths. In particular, for the policy advocacy, we assist the governments, municipalities, and departments to create an enabling environment to crowd in private sector investments and such kind of financing into their, green economy. But also we assist national and local governments to, come up with the appropriate action plans for the implementation of climate friendly programs. Excuse me. And of course, in doing that, we also do awareness and capacity building. In the past 2 years, we implemented the energy efficiency program in East Africa, and there are a number of tools that were, developed, and they are now in use. And of course, we also participate in different fora, like the UN Energy Technical Team, but also we are part of the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate Change and Energy, where we provide contributions on energy and access and poverty pillar. Of course, the situation that we are trying to work with is, there's a rapid urbanization. More than half of the population in the world is living in the urban areas, and this is projected to go up to 2/3 of the population comes 2050. And the access is, it has been said already, I mean, 1 billion people have got no access, and most of them, more than a half of those, are coming from sub-Saharan Africa. And we don't have any confidence that we'll be beating the SE for all by 2030. And the cooking energy is one of the biggest problem, with 2.7 billion people without access, but also still we don't see that much progress when we look at sustainable energy for all goals back come 2030. So if we want to make cities and urban areas resilient and sustainable, we cannot avoid providing clean energy applications in the services. Speaking a little bit, what are the differences and similarities when you talk of urban and rural, but also talking of development versus humanitarian? I have worked in the humanitarian per se for 2 years with the UNHCR, so I can I can be able to tell a bit of what it takes to undertake humanitarian services. So the rural settings and the refugee camps, for example, they've got some similarities, but definitely significant differences. Well, we can see in both like low purchasing power and attractiveness cases for the private sector to come in. But the most big snag into the camps, for example, is the nature of the temporary nature, and of course the policies which are guiding the camps. Of course, we see urban as they are a little bit better, but you are still faced with a lot of suppressed demand. And reliability is a big issue. I mean, outages in Africa, for example, it goes up to, 8 times a week. And that actually lasts like 5 hours or so. And again, how can we promote this solution now? But again, you see there's a huge myth, like fossil fuels. Will we be able to kick out the fossil fuel? Again, there is some debate, going on, and we have seen at the COP. I mean, the big elephants in the room. They've just changed the phrase in their favor. Of course, trying to argue that we cannot achieve the pace of development if we are going to phase out, the fossil fuels, but we have to really phase down. So that kind of an argument also, resonates a lot and has got a huge effect in terms of, applying the secular, mode of economy. Of course, innovation and technology will be key into, trying to, phase out, the polluting technologies as opposed to clean technologies. But of course, we see, countries, I mean, the issue of being honesty and accountable in the political class is quite huge, especially in the African aspect. You might find, the political class is benefiting out of the polluting technologies. I mean, I call it, they get kickback out of it. But of course, it takes attractive policies then to foster innovation. And of course, it takes political will to create attractive policies and to foster a wide adoption of clean energy solutions. And of course, we need a conducive environment to attract investments, to de-risk private sector investment. And we need to incentivize and provide schemes, subsidy schemes, special financing framework and programs for the humanitarian space. And we need to be mindful of prioritizing into vulnerable population. And the way to go, especially in towns and cities, I think decentralization is a big talk, and probably it's going to help a lot, because there's not much space to bring in technologies. Then we can utilize whatever we have, the existing structures, to provide access to clean energy, but also foster affordability and make the energy service reliable. So something like rooftops, solar parks and carports. And not only that, cities and urban areas have also to embrace this designing aspect of how they build the city itself and the neighborhood. So the green built environment is very important when it comes to that one. And it's very important not to abandon per se what is existing at the moment, especially talking of the developing world. We cannot afford to switch immediately to other technology like renewables, for example. We have to utilize whatever we have on the ground for the benefit of the transition. So hybridization could be one way to go. And the good thing is IRENA just launched a solar city rooftop simulator that will help collect information and analyze data to be able to determine the feasibility of installation of solar PV into the rooftops. And data has been a big snag when it comes to deploying clean energy technologies. So what should we do? I think you should go back to resource efficiency. I mean, as much as we talk of resource efficiency into other technologies like plastics, but also energy needs to embrace the reduce and the reuse and recycle. And we have to reduce the consumption as much as we can using efficiency, retrofitting, etc. But also we have to do something on reusing. I mean, heat, for example, is huge needs in towns, cooling and heating, and industrial processes. So we need to embrace, like reusing heat, for example, heat capture technologies, but also the issue of recycling, say, batteries. and electronic equipment for solar is still a big question, and people are still asking themselves, because it's in Africa, for example, there's not much capacity to recycle the batteries. So chemical waste and e-waste will need to be looked into carefully. But of course, to do this, we need appropriate policies, regulations, and a political will. And we need to put in place affordable financing, but also there has to be dedicated schemes for financing for that. Data will play a key role to be able to know exactly where should we do what, and technology innovation comes in. But international cooperation, South-South, South-West needs to be embraced as well, and also build local capacities. So, well, I'm going to end there, and I'll be happy to respond to the upcoming questions now or even after this presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel. Thanks very much for sort of setting the scene there, giving us a very good introduction to the sort of the key issues, the pressing issues. I mean, things that really stuck out for me is this, it's sort of political will. One has to have the political will. There's that kind of kickback element, which are the obstacles, but then how do you get the sort of the tech solutions there in on the ground? We'll wait for questions until we've had our other speakers going forward. Jørn, if I could now invite you to come and share your 10 minutes with us, that would be lovely. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and thanks a lot to Emmanuel also for giving his presentation. I was wondering a little bit about how to do this, because the field is so big, and we have kind of been fortunate from our side to take part of it for quite a long time, but it has been extremely difficult to advance it in the humanitarian world. NRC is a huge INGO with core competencies on different sectoral delivery of humanitarian work. For years and years, we have tried to drive clean energy processes within the organization, and also from the NORCAP side, which is where I work and where we collaborate with Øwre, in support to UN agencies on different kinds of programming. We have been pushing for a change in the direction of sustainability as a guidance to how we do big mass displacement operations. But the process has been extremely slow, and the small victories we've had have come from more small pilots than from being integrated in the way we do programming. But then the last 2-3 years, we have seen advances. And in the new strategy from our side, climate services are prioritized heavily, ranging from communication with children to collaboration with meteorological institutes. We're focusing on climate action and have a lot of interesting programming ongoing already. And then we have clean energy as a specific work stream where people like Emmanuel are being deployed in support of UN operations, but also in collaboration with the NRC country operations and even to support national authorities. And I think that I will give a little bit more based on some of the collaboration with Øwre afterwards, because it gives a nice bridge from what Emmanuel discussed, and then also I think it can be a good background to my main ambition, which is actually then to give some points on how challenging it may be in a humanitarian context to lift these topics when there are so many other things to address in the same humanitarian response. And that's also related to the last of these sustainable ambitions in our new strategies. It is to green the aid, because the big shelter operations, the urban interventions, and the refugee camps, they are the ones who have the biggest footprint, and where the impact of making a difference in the future will give best results. So I'm quite happy that we have been able to include this very clearly in the new strategy, and I think it is the way forward, and that some of the ongoing challenges we have seen the last 10 years are less now than they have been. But 10 years ago, we almost more than 10 years, because it was in Haiti, Norway made a huge contribution to the reconstruction fund, and that gave the Norwegian MFA significant role in the reconstruction fund, and they asked us to support on analysis and development of clean energy solutions in this severely hit country with almost no pre-existing infrastructure at all. So it was kind of the most challenging context to develop good programming on clean energy, but that was the clear mandate, and we engaged experts to do assessments on watersheds to see what kind of mini dams or bigger dams could be used for hydropower. We did investigation on the capacity for wave power plants and for wind, of course, and also on biogas production or waste management projects with waste to energy solutions in a quite diverse way. And I think it gives a really nice backdrop to some of the work that Synne and Ida has supported us with, comparing challenges in Lebanon and Nairobi, and highlighting some of these more structural challenges on energy programming. Yeah, so it is on this PDF, and there we are. That's kind of what I wanted to have as the backdrop. Because then on Haiti, we did all this eminent work on assessments and providing all the data. We even had the lawyers going through all the energy legislation in the country, and also through the administrative steps that was needed to provide the grid with green energy. So after assessing all the different solutions, we came up with a lot of functional plans on production, including also financing solutions to set up these different power plants, and secured the support from the Norwegian MFA and from the reconstruction fund. So we were ready to roll. And then the investigation on how to do this in the political context at the time and with the relevant stakeholders is where we met the biggest challenges. There was a company called Haytrack, who had a monopoly on producing and providing electricity to the grid. And it was clear that they would never provide the stability in the grid to allow for green energy to be added to the national grid. And of course, the national grid was non-existing. It was a local grid in Port-au-Prince that had been severely hit by the earthquake, and this company were able to bill about 30% of the power going out in the grid. At this time, I remember that 1 kilowatt hour was priced at 0.12 cents in Los Angeles, while it was 0.36 in Haiti, with the impact that has on business and costs and everything. But then it turned out that this gray zone corruption agreement between politicians and the company providing the power and also responsible for the grid left us with no possibility of reaching the grid with the green energy. Step by step, working with UNEP, working with the UNDP, and also with the Ministry of Health, we managed to set up local mini grids around the south, providing access to energy in villages and also in support of first-line health facilities, which then became the impact we could have due to all these political and system-related challenges. And also the last point on this challenging context was that there was another company that had bought the rights to all the garbage in Port-au-Prince. So there was no possibility to engage in waste to energy system, because the garbage that was just floating around the whole city was in principle owned by a company in the USA that wasn't really engaging and setting up any kind of waste systems at all, but still we couldn't access it. So that's kind of what I thought I would share, because it gave a very interesting way into energy. We had sufficient funding to do thorough analysis and to map out all the stakeholders, to identify the problems and trying to address them. And it became clear that we would not reach our goals, but we did find solutions to do good programming, which then was outside the regulatory sphere of and the political sphere, and it provided access to clean energy for a lot of very vulnerable people in a very critical phase of their lives. But the scaling and the durability of such an intervention is way less than what you would expect when dealing with so densely populated and thereby also areas that receive administrative attention from national and local authorities, and of course at the time also from the whole donor community and the humanitarian community. And this mirrors quite clearly some of the outcomes that Synne and Ida have identified in the study comparing Kenya and Lebanon, and also the Syria situation, where they present quite a lot of interesting challenges and points to address this complex humanitarian interventions attempting to provide clean energy to people in vulnerable conditions. I think I have already spent my time, but I will say that these points that they have put up is something that we can share and maybe also have as a background for discussions, because I felt that my Haiti history was kind of giving the empirical background for these questions. So thanks.
Thank you very much, John. That's fascinating. Really, really, really interesting. That's such a great case study, and you sort of set that out really well, and it dovetails very nicely with sort of Emmanuel, and obviously, you know, you identify key issues and common challenges sort of across the board. When it does come to the sort of Q&A session, I'd be interested to know, you know, more about the local mini grids and how you really sort of from a practical point of view or an operational point of view, how you manage to actually achieve that outside of the regulatory framework. That's really interesting, but at the same time lacking the scalability, as you said. Thank you so much for that. I'll now ask Pierre to come in and share his presentation with us. Thank you very much, Pierre. We've all been watching Lebanon well, I certainly have, closely over the past few months. So it'll be very interesting to sort of see how you identify those challenges, which seem to be common to us, at least from sort of watching from outside, and some of the challenges or issues that you've been addressing. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. It's a pleasure really joining you here this afternoon. So practically in the next 10 years or less, I will try to give a very short introduction about the current situation in Lebanon and how this situation is impacting specifically the energy sector, and even more specifically the development of sustainable energy in the country. And this is extremely interesting. And then finally, I would try to come up with some remarks that could constitute food for thought for the discussion afterwards. As you mentioned, Neil, Lebanon is witnessing currently a large number of crises, from an economic crisis to a financial crisis to a monetary crisis, in addition to the never-ending electricity crisis, which started back in 1998 and is continuing today. So I think the actual situation in the country makes the country an ideal place for research, because I think it's really rare to see so many crises stacking one upon the other. So by the day, the Lebanese population is witnessing new and severe living conditions. I've been listening to Jørn and the prices that the electricity prices that he mentioned. I can tell you in Lebanon, things are moving by the day. The economic situation is falling down by the day. Just to give you a feeling of what's going on, in the past probably 12 to 18 months, our local currency has lost of its value. Typically, we had 1,500 Lebanese pounds per US dollar. Currently, we are at 25,000 Lebanese pounds per US dollar. So practically it's 15 times less, and it's going down by the day. So we're really witnessing a very dynamic economical situation that is impacting the electricity sector and even more specifically the renewable energy development, and we'll come to that. For the electricity sector in Lebanon, practically the renewable energy form around 6 to 8% of our total electricity needs, which means that 94 to 96% rely on conventional power sources, which rely on the import of fuel oil, diesel oil, and some natural gas, hopefully in the future. So the country is heavily dependent on the import of fuel import for electricity production. And again, in the past 3 months, the cost of electricity has increased in a crazy manner. Just again to give you an indication, the private generators are the main source of electricity in the country. The national electric utility, which is called EDL, Électricité du Liban, currently covers 1 to 3 hours of electricity per day, meaning that the remaining 21 hours of electricity comes from private generators. The cost per kilowatt hour has increased from 480 Lebanese pounds to 5,200 Lebanese pounds in the past 3 months. So practically it's 11 times higher. People used to pay something like 1 cent per kilowatt hour. Today, people are paying around 32 cents per kilowatt hour. So, you know, the whole situation is changing in a crazy way. For the electricity produced by EDL, which is Électricité du Liban, today the Lebanese population are paying 0.6 US cent per kilowatt hour, versus I think Jørn has mentioned in LA, Los Angeles, I think it was 12 cents. We are paying 0.6. So practically the government, the government is giving free electricity to people. And this is again another problem, because this is affecting tremendously poor families in the country. Again, our colleague has done a very interesting study showing that 90% of the Lebanese population can be labeled as under the theme of energy poverty. 90% of Lebanese population, including people living in camps, including refugees, all of these people, 90%, are under the theme of energy poverty. Everybody is poor in terms of electricity supply in the country. So how is that affecting the development of renewable energy in Lebanon? I can tell you the renewable energy market in Lebanon is witnessing one of the best increases in the history of the country. Again, by using quantitative indicators, for the past 10 years, between 2010 and 2020, Lebanon witnessed the installation of 100 megawatts of solar installations, specifically solar installations. In 2021 alone, the country has witnessed the installation of another 100 megawatt. So practically in 1 year, the installation of solar systems in 1 year is equivalent to all solar installations in the past 10 years. Is this a good indicator from a clean energy perspective? Yes, this is a good indicator. However, from the economic point of view, it's not really a good indicator, because the installations that we are witnessing this year are due and are heavily affected by the economic crisis. It's not based on the willingness of people to move or to have this green energy transition. We are forced to do so. People are putting all their life savings in order to buy solar systems to supply electricity for homes and for families. This is a fact. Another indicator that is interesting, by 2020, the number of companies working in the solar photovoltaic market was around 130 companies, end of 2020. Today, we have something like 600 companies working in this market. Again, it's a tremendous increase. Now, to come, to come up with some conclusions that could be interesting for discussion. The country, and I think Sydney has worked a lot in camps and in different urban environment. What we're witnessing today, there's a trend for municipalities to lead on the supply of electricity, meaning practically we have something like 50 to 70 municipalities which are now taking the lead in order to supply electricity to the inhabitants, to the population, whether it's rural or urban or even in camps. So municipalities are now leading. And the thing is, this trend is illegal. So from a legislation point of view, it's fully illegal, but it's trendy. It is supported by donor communities, USAID among them, many other donors are supporting this trend. And the risk in this trend is that I believe, and this is my personal opinion, that the country is moving to federalism in electricity supply. We're going to an island mode where each local community is obliged to supply electricity to the inhabitants. And this is really dangerous, specifically in a country as complicated as Lebanon. Federalism is a risky step to take. Now, I still have few conclusions in that regard. We can really say that Lebanon is forced to implement a green energy transition. So it's not really a decision or it's not based on a vision. The country is forced to do so. I don't know if I should be proud or ashamed of this transformation. From a renewable energy point of view, I am proud that we're witnessing this huge mushroom effect in terms of deployment of renewable energy. But at the national level, at the economic level, it's shameful. My second conclusion would be that the role that municipalities are taking, because municipalities are under pressure, municipalities are taking the lead in ensuring electricity to the inhabitants. This is leading definitely to a federalism at the level of electricity supply. It's good temporarily for the inhabitants because people, they need electricity for the basic services, for the basic life needs, but at the longer term, it's really risky. The third conclusion, because the country is witnessing the development of solar energy, the urban setting has become a bit even more challenging. We're witnessing a large number of neighbors fighting over the use of the rooftop of buildings to install solar system. It's really like by the thousands. The internal security forces are receiving thousands of complaints from neighbors fighting with each other in order who's going to use the rooftop for solar installations. The Ministry of Energy and Water and the Ministry of Interior and Municipalities have developed a mechanism to facilitate the installations and to make sure that things are fair and square for everybody. But this is an interesting urban debate to see how we can have more solar energy in the urban setting. So practically, that would be my last statement. It's clear that the crisis is moving back to the urban cities of Lebanon. Historically, over the years, and while working with donors and the international community, a lot of focus was put to the rural areas. Again, Emmanuel has mentioned the rural areas, and the camp areas and the urban areas. So practically a lot of focus was put on the rural and camp areas. I think today the crisis and the problem are going back to the urban settings. This is where most of the crisis is focused. The urban environment in Lebanon, again, as Jørn has mentioned, is extremely complex. Many elements are integrated within this urban environment. Now we have a new issue, a new problem, which is the supply of electricity at the decentralized level, at the urban environment. So this is from my side. I hope I shed the light on the different challenges. I do know that it's good for the country to develop renewable energy with such a fast pace, but things are getting complicated, and a lot complicated at the urban level. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pierre. That another really interesting and fascinating presentation you've given. I mean, you really have given us a lot to think about there too. I mean, this idea, that you're all being forced to move into that, or to deploy sort of renewable energy. And whilst that's a really positive development, as you say, you feel proud of that, the fact that it's sort of really pushing towards this kind of federalization, as it were, is not politically, at least, or from a sovereign perspective, is ultimately going to be very, very challenging. And Lebanon specifically, that sets out a different set of challenges maybe that some countries wouldn't necessarily face. So there's like this inherent contradiction there, which feels very different to lots of other cases. I mean, what is interesting, and perhaps if I can just sort of bridge to maybe Jørn and perhaps start with Emmanuel, is I wonder to what extent, based on your experiences, I mean, what you both described really was sort of a resistance amongst present stakeholders in the system to shift and to change because they have a monopoly, or because their interests are already set. In terms of sort of clean energies, what is the conversation like at the sort of population level? Is there resistance there? Is there sort of an open arms welcome or an agnosticism? Emmanuel, if I could perhaps start with you on that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, that question actually, reminds me the situation that's going on back home from Tanzania. Now it's, the situation of energy supply, electricity supply in particular, is a bit complicated. We are faced with the drought, and we are very much depending on hydroelectricity to supply the energy. And now, the supply has shaken drastically, and we are witnessing rationing. So people are making a lot of noises as to what is the government doing. So what I'm trying to say here, I mean, looking at the perspective of the developing world, we are not very much mindful of the clean energy technology. What we are mindful for is the reliability of the service. Do we have the service in the first place? Whether it comes from the fossil fuel or not, people don't really, mind that much. There's a very small class of people that are mindful of, the color of the energy, whether it be green or blue or whatever. But generally speaking, people don't think that's a big deal. What we are witnessing now is some kind of push factor from external stakeholders. Like you guys, you have to do something when it comes to green energy. And that's where I think Africa cannot transit to clean energy easily because of the issues inherent to that, especially talking of the cost and the technology supply, etc., and the capacity to even not only deal with the new technologies, but also our grid to be able to absorb the intermittent nature of the renewables is not very much solved yet. So those are the issues. So the public out there is, of course, has been hearing from the international discussions like we have to go green. But I have to be fair, saying that yes, people are starting to talking about the green energy because they are witnessing a lot of climate change, and which is been, linked to the use of dirty energy, fossil fuel. So that's would be my response into that.
Thank you, Emmanuel. Jørn, if I could sort of pose the same question to you, and also if I could just tag on to that. Pierre had talked about the role of municipalities that they're playing in Lebanon, and that it seems like they're doing a really good job, but actually they're sort of doing it outside the legal framework. I wondered what you were describing, sort of the off-grid or the mini grid system. How does that sort of circumvent the regulatory framework? I mean, how is that kind of sustained? And clearly, that's something that donors, as you said, are supporting and pushing, because that seems to be an effective means of doing that, but sort of more on the margins.
I would say that Lebanon is an excellent example on how complex these things may be, with the religious leader, different economical elites, 13 sects, the political challenges that has been going on the last years. It clearly shows the complexity of urban interventions. And both according to the outcomes of the World Humanitarian Summit and the ambitions on localization of humanitarian assistance and nexus to stretch the ambitions from emergency responses to development to strengthening community resilience. It is very much more challenging in the urban context because there might be a company providing the water, a big economic interest in doing that, or a company providing the electricity. Whilst in a refugee camp, it's UNHCR or NRC providing the electricity. And these kind of mini grid interventions may have a lot of advantages, but the legislation differs from country to country. And in the camp, you can provide the mini grid, and in some urban contexts, you can do it, and you have more efficient ways of getting the power out in the mini grid than on a not well maintained national grid. So there are so many advantages, but there are also big economic and political power structures, and of course also a lack of legislation or legislation that doesn't allow it, that will hamper our ambitions to do this in a to a greater extent. But I think that another interesting side of that is also that you do not, to a very large extent, reach the most vulnerable of the people. We see, I remember from some research in Nairobi, that if you use 500 liters of water daily and need to heat it, then the market provides 10 to 20 different solutions. But if you need to provide your little shelter in a slum area with just enough to charge your phone, there wasn't much available on the market. So the low scale solutions were not accessible, while for the rich people there were many things to choose from. And from the humanitarian perspective, when this kind of also links to connectivity and access to services, because if you break your leg, you need to call the ambulance, or if you want to take part of a cash distribution program from humanitarian actors, maybe you need the connectivity, and it is certainly increasing. It also then links energy to connectivity and thereby to you accessing your rights, which may also relate to, if you are in Lebanon, how do you benefit from these government supported structures? Or do you just have the 50% richest of the population actually being able to benefit from these supported structures? So I think that what we are working on are holistic approaches, and then to test out what kind of analysis can we do on the political or the different power arenas, because without understanding that, you won't get far. And based on the background from the camp management business, we say normally that maybe your tools and your trainings can take you 25% of the road, but the rest is adaptation to local contexts, and thereby understanding how can these solutions be implemented in this specific context.
Thank you, Jørn. Pierre, I'm going to ask you a question, but then I would encourage colleagues to also, I don't want to just monopolize the the discussion. So I'd encourage colleagues to either sort of pose questions in the chat, or we can also ask questions amongst ourselves, because there's a rich experience amongst the three of you. Pierre, just a question that I mean, how have the municipalities managed to sort of step into this space? I mean, how have they developed, or where does that capacity come from to be able to sort of perform from what you've described as pretty well? I mean, it's sort of it's an evolving or emerging decentralizing system that seems to be functioning quite well and advancing sort of the renewable deployment.
Yeah, I think, Neil, the thing is that most of the Lebanese people have lost their trust in the central government or in the centralized administrations and ministries in the country. And now people are going more and more to less decentralized forms of government. And this is where the role of municipalities have popped up. So practically now, most Lebanese are looking for solutions, for electricity solutions, at the level of villages, of small towns, of neighborhoods. So this is a trend now. And given this fact, given this high level of mistrust or lack of trust in central government, municipalities have taken the lead in ensuring electricity to their citizens, or to villages where they govern. The thing is, however, is that municipalities, they don't have a legal framework to produce electricity and to sell electricity. And this is one major issue. With that, we are witnessing, again, probably something like 70 municipalities, which are now, they have their own generators, many of which are solar generators, solar farms. They are producing electricity, they are distributing electricity to the inhabitants, to citizens, and they are collecting money. So many municipalities, I would say 50 to 70, and the next few years, I would imagine we'll have something like 200 to 300 municipalities will be local IPPs. They will be local independent power producers. And this is extremely challenging for EDL, for the National Electricity Utility, because practically 300 municipalities is something like 1/3 of the municipalities which are in Lebanon. So practically 1/3 of the country will be independent from the monopoly of EDL, the National Electricity Utility. The challenge now, and I've written this down, the challenge is for the government, for the Ministry of Energy and Water, where I'm based now, is to see how we can update the regulations in a quick way, in a very quick way, in order to cope with the changes which are taking place on the ground. So very soon, practically probably in 2 years or 3 years, Lebanon will be witnessing a de facto decentralization of the electricity sector. And this decentralization needs to be translated into legislation. The legislation will need to follow the de facto situation on the ground.
Thank you very much. And you see that, I mean, you see that as a trajectory and one that's likely to be sustained. I mean, it doesn't strike me there's much of an alternative, but sort of decentralization. I was looking at sort of decentralization and that issue, if one applies it to Syria, for example, and other countries, it's a highly contested term and phrase, and it carries obviously sort of political connotations with it. So I guess if one's projecting that, as you said, that's that makes life can make life very complicated.
I mean, for me, decentralization, specifically at the electricity level, is bad for a small country and a complicated country like Lebanon. No, I'm against decentralization. I'm more into a flexible, centralized system, yet rather than decentralization, because Lebanon has a lot of, the problems of Lebanon. We have a lot of religions, we have a lot of political parties. So no, decentralization, it's one way before federalism. And again, federalism is not a smart move for the country. Yet the thing is, whenever we can imagine, if you imagine that 1/3 of Lebanon's municipalities are turning green, it's an amazing step for renewable energy in the country. But at the political, at the legislative, at the governance level, I don't think this is a wise step for the country.
Thank you, thank you. I sort of want to really open this up amongst ourselves, or unless we get some questions in the Q&A. So, Emmanuel, do you have questions for Pierre or Jørn, or likewise from amongst you guys?
Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting stuff that is I'm hearing from Lebanon, especially from UN Habitat perspective. What we are trying to advocate for is, decentralization. In a way, we think, municipalities should, shift from being consumers of energy and also being generators of energy. Of course, as Pierre said, I mean, it has to happen in a systemic way, not like by default. And what is happening in Lebanon, it can be catastrophic because everything is going to be like retroactive. The danger in making retroactive legislation, you might find yourself, having something not fitting for that purpose. I can give you an example. For example, in Tanzania, the biofuel topic came up very rapidly back in like 3 years ago, and we saw mushrooming of influx of different stakeholders, investors into the biofuels. And then the government said, oh no, now we have to have legal framework. But see, I mean, it didn't go anywhere. As I speak now, like 5 years down the line, I mean, that was completely useless. I'm not saying for Lebanon is going to be the same, but again, there's a danger of not doing things right because they'll be doing in the so-called fire brigade fashion rather than being, you have to be focused as to how to prepare something which is going to be sustainable and of course fit for purpose. So this is what I'm trying to see. But of course, if I may ask a question to Pierre again, and it's very interesting. How is the urban setting like? Is it dominated by apartments, like story apartments, or like villas? Just to understand why people are fighting for space to put up solar rooftops. Yeah, I mean, it's quite an interesting stuff. Yeah, thanks.
Yes, thank you, Emmanuel. Practically in Lebanon, the urban or the situation could be divided into two types of zones. One is the rural areas where most of the apartments are 1-story, 2-story apartments, a villa style, a family-based style. And in those parts of the country, it's extremely easy to install solar, and many who are capable, because solar is still expensive in the country, many are going to this option. The problem is in the biggest or the bigger cities, specifically Beirut. In Beirut, we have a lot of high-rise building, like probably with 20 or 30 floors with small rooftops. And this is effectively where a lot of the, the troubles among neighbors is taking place. And this is the challenging part, because half of the population, half of the Lebanese population lives in the greater Beirut area where you have a lot of high-rise building. So in the other parts of the country, it's easy to have solar. In this part where we have a high density of the Lebanese population, problems arise on a daily basis.
Thank you. We've actually got 2 questions that have come in, so I'll just pose it to the panel and see who wants to take. Do you have any empirical examples of the decentralization of energy initiated by people even below the municipal level? So that's one question. And a second is, and do you see synergies between energy decentralization and other decentralization projects, for example, agriculture or community farms? Who would like to take on 1 or 2 of those questions?
Yeah, I think that I have something that I care about a lot, because we do settlement planning trainings with all the big agencies, with IOM, UNHCR, IFRC, and all the other INGOs are welcome to send people to these trainings. And what we see is that in the big operations, we need to address sustainable infrastructure in a more holistic way. Because just to make a quick example, if you have a refugee camp or an urban area that you need to support from the humanitarian side, then you need the proper waste management, you need the water treatment, you need of course the other sides of sanitation as well, but you also need to divide people for security reasons. It may be that you are dividing groups of young men and families in a way. So this sustainable infrastructure has an impact on the social infrastructure. You may use it to create better protection, or you may lose out on that opportunity. So more and more we are advocating that proper planning gives much more benefit of these new opportunities that come along, because as we've done it previously in the humanitarian operations, it has been energy has been one tunnel vision department in UNHCR, in NRC, and so on. But if we want to have a big impact on the big operations, then we need to get it as a part of the operational side and not as a sidetrack, as a technical specific sidetrack. So we have to bring the clean energy into the bigger operations. And when we do that, we may also regard it much better from a holistic standpoint and include it in the full thing. For example, with regards to Lebanon, this increase in private solar cells will, of course, create a very challenging waste management issue down the road, and probably already. And how do you set up for good recycling and reuse and adaptations of these things? And then when you do that, you can also have better waste management system on other things. So it there are so many benefits, and the consequences of not thinking holistically in this sustainability ambitions is extremely challenging if you're not able to address it. And of course, in the pressed economy, it's difficult to do it, but it may be very costly.
Thank you very much, Jørn. Actually, we do have another question, and perhaps this would be a good one for Emmanuel. Key challenges for the provision of energy, electricity. How much depends on politics versus technical solutions? You sort of highlighted this a little bit. It'd be quite nice to get a sort of a sense of the balance between the two things.
Well, I mean, that's a very good question, especially for me, who is an engineer by background. I can tell you for sure, technical is not a problem. I mean, technology is not a problem. It's technology is there, but the will to adapt the technology, that's the biggest challenge. And of course, the will comes from the policy aspect, but also the political issue. It might be difficult out of ignorance from the political class, or they just don't want because it's not on their, I mean, it's not favoring them. I can give you one example, which is a vivid example. I won't name the country, but in one of the countries which I worked for humanitarian aspect, we were advocating for bringing in mini grids to the camps, and the technology was not a problem. I did all sort of techno feasibilities and a design, etc., of the mini grid powered systems to replace diesel generators to be able to power the camp support facilities like hospitals, reception centers, etc. But again, the government was, did not like that thing to happen. And they did all they could not to allow for that thing to happen, because they, they looked at it as if you are bringing a permanent solution to the refugees, and then you are giving them a comfortable environment for them not to, to think of, going back home or even seeking the third solution. And, in this case, the political and policy aspect plays, a greater deal when it comes to being able to deploy a certain sort of solution. You might have all sophisticated, cutting-edge technologies. You might have partners to bring in financing. You might have partners to even bring in the technology. But if the the political class, if the policies of the countries does not favor into what you are trying to tell them, it won't happen. So if you ask me, policies are much more important than even technology, because the technology, you can always get it.
Thank you very much. I'm going to wrap up in a second, but just touching on that, it's really interesting. I had colleagues at Chatham House about a decade ago. I won't say which country, but they carried out a report, and the findings of the report were sufficiently persuasive to the very senior leadership who were taking a longer term look at their energy situation in the country, that they then used the report. This was a very senior leadership. They then used the report as a means for sort of, messaging out and signaling to the population that, subsidies are a good thing. And that kind of cascaded down through the system. And that country now has a decade later, has really started to, sort of lift the subsidy piece. But it was interesting. There was suddenly buy-in from the most senior leaders in the country, and then you had that cascade as a consequence of that. So in terms of that sort of technical solutions, I'm not an engineer, but I love engineers because they get things done and they always fix stuff, whereas politicians just sort of dwell on issues for a long time because there are other interests at stake. Anyway, time is up. So Emmanuel, Jørn, Pierre, thank you very much. I thought it was a really, really good session. I've really enjoyed being a discussant with you, and I've certainly learned a lot. And I thought that the three sort of cases that you brought together are highly instructive and informative. So from my perspective, thank you very much. And I hand over to our colleagues.
Thank you.